Hi, this is Ryan Moynihan, CEO of Gaidge. Thanks for joining the podcast tonight. Tonight, we're going to talk to you about Gaidge and walk you through how you can understand your practice, understand your numbers, look at data, how data is impacting not only your practice, but the overall market. Look forward to you listening to this, and you can see some really cool trends of what's happened in the orthodontic industry since the pandemic, and then what we can expect for 2022.
Welcome to another Aligner Insider podcast. Well, hello, everybody in podcast land. Welcome back to another Aligner Insider podcast. I am Dean Steinman, President of Ortho Marketing, and to my right today, I have the one and only Dr. Barry Glaser. How are you today, Dr. G?
Doing well today, Dean. Today is Wednesday, October 27th. The leaves are coming down. We have some crazy rain out there, but fall is definitely here. But it could be worse, right? We're all happy and healthy, so things are doing okay. How you doing, Dean?
I'm doing good, considering my Jets are one in blah 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 blah. But it's welcome back, Joe Flacco. So as we were a little tangent here,
Right.
So so we're all good, and when we look at the Jets data, it's not too positive. So as a tangent off of that, we talk about data. We're very excited to have our special guest with us today. Today we have Ryan Moynihan. Ryan is works with Gaidge, and Ryan is the CEO. And we wanted to have him join us, talk a little bit about technology, about data, how important data is, and learn a little bit about what's going on in the industry. So, Ryan, how you doing today, bud?
I'm good. Thank you guys for having me. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for joining us. So we like to kind of jump right into it. So we always off of things at the beginning. So tell us the Gaidge story. Well, tell us, who was Gaidge and how did they come to be?
Yeah, absolutely. Gaidge is a data analytics business intelligence tool for the orthodontic industry. Basically, what Gaidge does is it extracts the information out of your practice management system, and we take that information and basically visualize it, put it in charts and graphs so it makes it very, very easy for you to see your own practice's data, where you're winning and losing, and how you can course correct or celebrate, depending upon what the data is telling you. Also, it gives you the ability to benchmark yourself versus other orthodontists in similar type practices in the same area of the country that you practice in. You have the ability to use. We also have an overhead module with it too, so we can pull in your QuickBooks accounting data, and you get a spending Pareto. That way, you can compare that to the benchmarks that are out there in the industry and see if you're over or under spending and how profitable you are. So it creates that mock P&L. And Gaidge is also available on your cell phone, so you can see it at any point in time. Obviously, that's the device we all interact with the most these days. It really gives you the opportunity to quickly get a pulse on your practice, and it's created in such a way that by consultants. So Gaidge was actually founded by Mary Beth Kirkpatrick back in late, I think 2008, 2009. It started off as Orthometrics. But it was a function of Mary Beth has been an industry consultant for the past 30, 35 years. And as she would go into practices, it would take, a day and a half to pull the data, extract it, analyze it, and kind of figure out where to start poking around. So what Gaidge does is it automates that process and rolls all that up. And so, there's a lot of, and we also partner with the other consultants in the industry as well. So they've helped shape and create what Gaidge is today as well. So that's, it's consultant driven, consultant created. And so that hopefully gives the orthodontist a quick look into his or her data. Obviously, orthodontists at heart are clinicians, not necessarily data geeks. And so it's really easy to hopefully take some of that time and pressure off of them by being able to have that all automated form and rolled up in such a way that it makes it very easy for you to see how you're performing. So that's the story of Gaidge.
And what was the aha moment? How did it even come to be? Was it just a hole in the market and just needed somebody to coagulate all this data and figure out a strategy and give people a roadmap?
I think the aha moment was just the inordinate amount of time it would take for Mary Beth, her team, and obviously a lot of other consultants have jumped on this as well. We have a consultant portal where they can come and access their clients or their doctors' information as well. But yeah, it's about that time efficiency to be able to get to the cut to the chase really, really quickly. With the data that's running through your practice. So you can imagine the practice management systems, for the most part, you can go get all the information out of there, but you have to pull reports. You got to mix and match, dump it into Excel, analyze all those types of things. And if we can do all that work for you and make that automated, hopefully that saves you time and drives that efficiency in your practice.
Ryan, I'm a relatively new user, but Dean and I all the time talk about analytics, and one of our favorite movies is Moneyball, and Billy Beane was a pioneer in really revolutionizing baseball and looking at the data. And Chris Benson, who I'm sure you know too, says if you can't measure it, you can't fix it. So I think it's a fascinating platform. But my question is this: so Gaidge has access to the data on, I assume, thousands of practices. You have a lot of users. So these days, let's get right into it. So what is especially you're coming out of it, the pandemic, hopefully we're coming out of it. What is the data telling you about the trends that are currently happening in the orthodontic industry?
Yeah, absolutely. And so we have just finished running a couple different lectures. And, when I look at the data, I look at these last, call it 18, 20 months. So we look at pre-pandemic, pre-COVID, which is going to be January and February of 2020. Then you would go into the shutdown months where the practices, the middle of May were shut down through, middle of March, were shut down through potentially through May. Then we look at June, July, August, and September of last year as kind of this pandemic reopening. And then for the last 9 months leading up to June of this summer, we call that the recovery period. And then the last 3 months, which was Q3 that we just ended, we'll call that the new normal. So we've put those into categories as far as just time periods. And it's really interesting to see what the data shows us. And we look at 5 key pieces of data that we think are the real telltales in a practice when it comes to really understanding where you're at. And those are production and collection. Then it's new patients added to your practice, into an exam and into a start. And that's really your sales funnel. That's how you are able to measure, how many people are calling my practice, how many of those did I actually get in for an exam, and how many of those did I convert to a start, which ultimately that leads to production and collection. So with all that being said, across all 5 of those metrics, just generalizing, as we came out of the shutdown periods, we call that the pandemic reopening, which is June of 20 through September of 20. We saw almost double-digit growth, and so a lot of that was pent-up demand that had been sitting on the sidelines, during the shutdown. So, but for the orthodontic, just to put it in perspective, when we look at aggregate data for the USA, to see double-digit growth is very, very unheard of. Traditionally, the market grows at anywhere between 1 and 3, 1 and 4%. And so to see that jump up into that double-digit category was really surprising, but then not so surprising because it was based on a lot of pent-up demand. So as we close off that pandemic reopening, call it CAT section in September 20, and we move into the recovery, which was, call it a 9-month period, October 20 through June of 21, we saw the same trends and actually accelerate those trends. So for, call it 9 months plus the 3 from the reopening, that's a 12-month period, actually a 13-month period. We're seeing double digits across those 5 major categories: production, collection, new patients added to your practice, exams, and starts. So really, really encouraging. And obviously, as doctors pivoted and came out of the pandemic, to see that type of growth be sustained for a long period of time was really, really exciting. Now, as we hit Q3 of the summer, so July, August, and September, we've started to see everything start to soften. Now, there's a couple things going on there where with production, it was about 3%, so kind of returning back to your normal metrics. We're still seeing pretty strong exams. Those are still at 9%. New patients adds were 4%, but starts were actually below the prior period. They were at 1% loss on that. So what's interesting to see is that now, granted, in this Q3, they were up against a very high comp, and a comp is like what last year's period did. Mm-hmm. So that caused, it's a little bit harder to overcome that because it was so high coming out of the pandemic with that run up. But overall, we're seeing that the market is softening, and the overall industry is kind of returning back to those normal times. And so we do another analysis called a rate of change analysis. And with the rate of change analysis, we look at a 3-month rolling average across those same 5 metrics. And then we also compare that with a rolling 12-month year-over-year % average. And so when the 3-month average goes below the 12-month average, it's a leading indicator that the market is softening. So in the last 3 months, we've seen that 3-month rolling average across all 5 of those metrics start to dip below the 12 months, specifically in August and September. So that just leads us to believe that the market is returning more to normal. It's still showing growth, but it is softening. And then if you tie that back to like some of the overall macroeconomic trends that we're seeing, and I benchmark a company called ITR Economics through one of my CEO networking groups, and they have a lot of really good information. They're very spot on when it comes to the economy. And they're predicting as we move into 2022 that the economy will slow. It will still have growth. It won't be recessionary, but it will slow down. And so I think we're starting to see that as we hit the back half of the year. In October, we have data obviously through yesterday, the 26th. And as we look at October, we're showing the trends across those 5 metrics as well as being flat to down.
So now that's
softening.
Yeah, so now that's fascinating because there's been a lot of chatter, on the online groups, talking about 2 things in particular: fee structures and overhead. And I know, for example, Chris Benson, again, our friend Chris, has just recently advocated that maybe it's time to, evaluate fees and maybe bump them up 3 to 5%. But how does that dovetail with, let's say, a softening market? I mean, obviously our overheads are going up, but what trends do you see there? And do you have any recommendations for the average Joe orthodontist like myself?
You're not average. Above that. So when we look at the average contract fees over the last, even in Q3 and year to date, they're up about 3%. So, and Chris and I, we partner a lot in data share, and as he has a big platform speaking, and so he uses a lot of Gaidge data when he's up on the podium. Mm-hmm. So, what I'm saying is kind of what he's saying as well. And as we look at this fee structure, I mean, there is a great opportunity. And I just spoke, we both had a platform at the GLAO meeting 2 weekends ago. And, he basically talked about, if you're not raising your fees, you're crazy. You need to be raising them. This is the time to raise them. Don't feel like you have to keep them where they're at. The market is bearing that. And then obviously the aggregate data that we have when we're rolling up our 1,000+ practices, I mean, we're seeing it up 3%. So there's definitely an opportunity, in my opinion, to be raising those fees, and every orthodontist should be doing that at this point. Even the initial fees are up 5-6% as well, as far as the down payment. So the money's there, and there's more money. If you go back to my ITR comment, when you look at consumer spending, there's more money now that's available for consumer spending than has ever been. I think it's $15 trillion off the top of my head. And, obviously the stimulus checks have come in 3 different waves. They're done. However, there's still a lot of money out there for consumers to spend. So that may change. Obviously there's some headwinds ahead. We've seen some inflationary pressures now. The economic outlook is obviously like, when will this bull market end? I think a lot of people are scared about that. Just some other headwinds that I think people are just kind of having some caution on as we move forward. So, but all in all, yeah, I think that's where we're at.
What is the number one piece? Because there's so many different pieces of data that a practice has available to them now. And obviously, Barry, you can jump in anytime. As an orthodontist, they're focused on what they do and they're trained in that. So, some people see these numbers, their heads could spin. So what should they be focusing? At the end of the day, is it just collection? Is it just sales? If you had to pick one main KPI, one main piece of data, what would you say is the most important piece of data for somebody to look at?
It's hard to pick just one. However, when we look at the data, I mentioned 5 of them before, right? And I kind of take you back to those 5 because those are foundational for running a practice. I can't say just look at net production and not look at your funnel to get to net production, right? So the 2 are intertwined and they go together. So the way that I look at it, and to simplify it, because yes, we track over 80 some metrics in Gaidge. And so if we're going to expect an orthodontist to be up to speed on all those, your head's going to spin off, because it's just it's not logical to do that. So when we break it into small pieces and parts, I mean, production. So I look at this, what we call the consumer conversion waterfall, right? And so that is, how many people are calling me, how many people are coming in for an exam, and how many of those am I converting from an exam to a start? That is your sales funnel as an orthodontist.
That's all, right? I look at. That's, for me, those are only 3 numbers I care about.
Exactly. So that to me is the key, because then if you do that really well, those starts turn into production, and that production turns into collection. So it's kind of how that model is fed. So where I focus the practices, and we have tools to look at this as well. We actually calculate a leaky bucket based on the fall off from how many patients called, or how many patients called me to how many came in for an exam. So you'll see that if we look at even the aggregate data across the USA, on average, there's about a 20% fall off. There should be about a 10% fall off from new patient call to exam.
This is from the phone call to the
From the
people
phone
that show up.
call to the exam. There's a 20% fall off. We buffer. We believe 10% is a fair number. So there's a 10% gap there of what we call just lost revenue opportunity. And so that can add up when you look at practices that, may have 700-800 calls over a year. It could be a couple $100,000 of lost potential. And that's massive when you start thinking about that. And then you move that further to the exam, to the start. And then within that, okay, maybe you have an observation program within your practice. So when you put a patient in there, how are you actively managing them so you can actually pull them out when they're ready? Because we also see patients go into observation, but they don't necessarily come out at the same rate. So right there, you create a relationship, you examine them, but yet you're not monitoring them close enough to be able to pull them out and put them into revenue. So we believe that 20% of your starts per year should come from your observation, if that's you have an observation system in your practice. A lot of times we see that as being 10, 12%. So then you're missing 8% there. So then that becomes another leaky bucket. And then even the phase 1 to phase 2 conversion, you already treated them, create a relationship, you already treat them, and then they just don't come back for phase 2. So there's another leaky bucket there. So when you add all those up, you could be into hundreds of thousands of dollars of just missed opportunity in your practice. So that's where, my message is to really focus on those basic fundamental funnel actions. And then obviously, okay, how do I get my phone to ring? Then you can get into some other things that we can talk about a little later as far as getting the phone to ring. And then, on the back end of this, once you do get them into a start, the other thing that really that stands out in the data is the overestimated completion date for practices. So clinicians are taking way too long to treat patients in aggregate, which is costing more appointments, more chair time, all that kind of stuff, which there's a cost behind that too. So we do run some models just on treatment efficiency as well that show the average, what you said you were going to do versus what you did, and then looking at how many patients are over ECD by some of them 60, 90, 120 days, which is a major problem in a lot of practices. So I guess in a nutshell, I know you wanted one, but I had to give you that main one in the middle, and then kind of look at how that breaks off into over ECD and then leads to production and collection.
Just as before we move forward, just as a personal comment, I've been aware of Gaidge for a long time, and I don't need it. What do I need it for? But I guess I've been on board now for, I don't know, 4 or 5 months, and this as an unsolicited comment. It's incredible. I mean, now that I see the data, now I understand. I understand the value to that, and it's actually, the practice has done probably better from a growth standpoint this year than ever before, and I think part of the reason is because I have more of an understanding of what's actually going on. And it's not, Ryan, it's not surprising, right? When you have the data, when you can measure it, you can see what you're doing and you can fix it. But I think, I suppose, how do you deal with someone like me who doesn't think that they need it until they see it? So, what do you do as far as trying to talk to doctors about and explaining the value of, let's say, the cost for the service versus the benefits?
What do they also do with the data too? One thing about that, so you look at the data and you see it's going one way or the other. What do you do with that number? The people from there, they say, okay, great, I got this number, I'm up 8%, I'm down 4%, this and that, but how do they make heads or tails of it? There's got to be a reaction to that. And how do they even know what to do with those numbers? It's just great. Thanks for the data. Okay, here, thanks for the penny, Popeye. From of Gumball. How what do they do with that? And do they bring it to their accountant? Do they bring it to their consultant? What do they do? How do they even sift through these numbers?
So within Gaidge, every metric, every chart that we publish has kind of a help guide attached to it. So you're able to pop that open and get an explanation of what's the data is telling you. And then it has some suggestive opportunities of what you can do if you're above or below the benchmark
Oh,
there.
cool.
So
Okay.
so there's actually some coaching and teaching within the system that can help you on your way. Obviously, the next route, consultants in the industry, and like I said, we have a consultant portal where not only our Impact 360 consulting team, but other consultants that we partner with on the Gaidge side can go in and basically look at their practice's data with their practice's permission. And so that's another way that the practice can kind of make heads or tails of the data, leveraging the consultant and the close relationship that I know a lot of practices have with consultants. I mean, that's another hot topic that Chris Benson is talking about on the platform this fall is you need a Sherpa, and your Sherpa is the consultants, whoever you identify with, but they can really help you. And the practices that are leveraging consultants are growing at a faster pace. And then Dr. Glaser, to your point, where what gets measured gets improved, and looking at your practice maybe improving this year as a function of knowing the data. We see that all the time because when we start a new client, we'll load in 2 or 3 years of historical data. And so we can see that inflection point, where they're starting to engage with the tool and start to, see that happen, that uptick is starting to happen within their practice just as a function of that. And then, you guys are entrepreneurs, you're business owners. And so you look at the corporate, but you're running a business, right? And a business is a business, whether you're a small business or whether you're a big business. But you see all the time the corporations, I mean, they have more data, more metrics, more KPIs, and more teams to analyze that than you can imagine. So when things go out of whack or out of scope, then they've got, tiger teams there to be able to fix that. And obviously it's a much smaller scale with a small practice with an entrepreneur, but the same thing is what we're trying to do with the service, and what we believe Gaidge does is automate that whole process for you and take that off your plate, so you don't have to analyze and sift through data and scratch your head and go, what goes with what? We try to lay it out because it's developed by a consultant that says, hey, this is how you should see your data in your practice. So that's where we see the value is.
Question you mentioned earlier, Ryan, is you work with get the data from their practice management systems. So many of them don't let you get access to it. Do you pull it as well as write to it, or are you only pulling data and not being able to do it? Because one of the biggest issues we were facing over the years is just being able to do online scheduling, and we couldn't do so because of they were closed software and they didn't have an API available, or they wouldn't let it get out. So obviously there were some practice management systems that are a little more forward thinking than others, but there were so many out there. So how do you handle that? Because there's dozens and dozens of softwares out there. Some of them are cloud based, some are not. And if they're not cloud based, obviously it's going to be difficult for you to access it. But those that are so obviously I'm sure some work well with you, but if somebody doesn't have it, what do they have to do? Export a CSV and then import it back to you? Like how what needs to be done?
Yeah, so we are partners with the, call it, 6 largest practice management systems in the ortho space, and with those, that covers probably 90% of practices.
Okay,
so
good.
there's 6, and I know there's a handful of other practice management systems, but they probably make up the remaining 10. So we have formal business agreement integrations with each one of those, where we have access to that data to be able to pull it on a nightly basis. We do not write back.
Okay.
But that's something that it comes our way, and then we take it and graph it, chart it, visualize it, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, so it's a business partnership that we're working with them on the back end, because a lot of the practice management systems don't necessarily have a elaborate analytics package. They might have a few basic ones, but they don't have the depth of what Gaidge has.
What's the number one objection that people come to you that you have to overcome when you're trying to promote or sitting in front of a practice? And what's the number one reason, I guess, besides price, if that is a reason, for them that they're saying no to you?
Yeah, I mean, and we're fortunate in the space where we're kind of the one company that does what we do. So we're not necessarily competing directly with anybody. I mean, certain other companies have little offshoots of things that we do, but not necessarily directly. I would say, one of the biggest things is potentially just the orthodontic business model is very lucrative if you look at it. When you add up the top line with the overhead that, sometimes is roughly 50-60%, orthodontists can take home 40% take home. So that, and you do the math on an average orthodontic practice of 300 starts at $5,000 a case, top line, take home half of that. It's a lucrative profession. So, and I don't want to sound disrespectful here at all, and I'm not being like that. And it's more, I'm saying this more in a joking way, but there's not necessarily a lot of pain sometimes. And so orthodontists, I always use the term, they can be tripping over $100,000 bills because they're not necessarily looking at their metrics. So I think one of our biggest objections is, either there's just not any pain to say, like, and I know I was introduced one time when I was speaking, and the doctor introduced me. He's like, I used to look at my bank account and I had a lot of money in there, but I didn't realize till I got Gaidge that I have even more now as a function of that. So I think that's one of them. Maybe it's just not understanding data, and people can be afraid of data. So we tried through our onboarding process to just, dummy that down, distill it, and even there is 80 different KPIs and a handful of tabs, but we really focus you in on, here's the critical few, and start to really learn those, and then branch out to 3 more, and then you can get more proficient at it over time. So I would say, maybe it's the lack of pain with a very lucrative business model that orthodontists are so blessed and gifted to have, and then also too just maybe fear of the data.
If you give advice to a listener as far as how to handle the program, is this something that they should be doing themselves? Do they delegate it to the office manager? Who's the person that should be looking at this here? Because when it comes to the marketing, what we do, it's very difficult for obviously Dr. Glaser is very unique as far as him being active on it. But a lot of times they have to delegate the marketing out to somebody else in the practice because they're just too busy focusing on what they're doing. So so at the end of the day, who should be looking at it? Is it the doctor himself? Because they said, I got so much going on, I can't handle this. Like my head will be spinning again. So typically, what advice do you give somebody, as far as who should be looking at it, and and from what perspective?
So within the practice, Gaidge has a feature where you can assign by role within your practice what they get to see and not see. So a doctor would obviously see the entire thing, but maybe an office manager wouldn't see some aspects of Gaidge, whether it be accounts receivable, collections, production, and then your financial coordinator would obviously see your production, collection. Maybe your TC doesn't get to see that, but the TC would get to see new patient calls, exams, and starts, that whole funnel that we talked about earlier. So those that leverage the tool leverage it across the entire staff, but the entire staff, we can fix it to where they can only see what they need to see for their job. So it really simplifies the tool as well, because those other fields that they don't necessarily need to be involved with are hidden, and they can only see what their area of expertise or area of opportunity is within the practice.
I'm going to ask you to put your crystal ball glasses on, and what do you see is going to be the next piece of technology that's going to be used in a practice? Who thought of virtual consultations 2 years ago? Nobody. So automated processes, automated follow-ups, et cetera. So where do you see, 2022, end of that 23, which is coming down the pike, that you think is going to be a game changer?
Yeah, and I don't know if it's necessarily a product, but it's an environment, a destination work environment for the up and coming generation. So obviously, generations change, and there's a different type of person you're employing these days. And so I think you have to create an office and a work environment. You don't want that turnover. And I think even during COVID with, the government checks and, where those all landed, it was hard to staff your office at certain periods of time. But I think you got to create that up and coming work environment and be progressive with, kind of the themes and the trends of what's happening in the orthodontic space. And you got to continually shift and move. So, more generally, I don't know if there's necessarily a product that I haven't thought of at this point. I mean, obviously everything is becoming more and more digital. We're really focused on the digital patient experience. So how can you really make that simple? So I know, obviously with remote monitoring, virtual, taking your practice that way, that was a big thing that COVID really forced us into. And doctors have been very successful sticking with that strategy. Some have pulled back off that strategy. But that's just another way to minimize appointments, to be able to treat the patient potentially remotely while they're at home. And that's what, a patient these days, I mean, they want it easy, quick, right now, very, very simplified and digitized, especially that younger generation. So I think the more and more that we can become more automated and just, that way too, hopefully it reduces your number of visits, which from a treatment efficiency standpoint can improve that as well. and that's going to be more dollars in your pocket when you're doing that.
Okay, two more questions. All right. I'm going to give you the ability to put up a billboard in Times Square tomorrow. Okay, what is Ryan Moynihan going to say on that billboard? It's going to be seen by 10 million people. Doesn't have to be anything about Gaidge. It's just, what message do you want 10 million people to see tomorrow?
Oh, gosh, that's a good question. That's a curveball for me, for sure. I mean, I think with where the world is, I think there's a lot of people that are stressed out, riding on the rails. I would want us to all get along, have peace and harmony, and go back to just remembering we're all people. We're all fighting for something, and we all see the world a little differently, which is good and that's healthy. But it doesn't mean I can disagree with you, but I don't have to hate you because I disagree with you because I'm on the other side. So I think there's a lot of that going on. So I would just pray for folks to respect and understand other people's perspectives and be okay with that, because I think that's how you grow and enrich yourself as a person.
Cool, good. All right, and the most important question of all. All right, buckle up, man. Reese's peanut butter cup or Snickers?
Reese's.
Yeah, man.
Nice.
Especially with
Right.
Halloween coming around the corner.
Exactly.
I'm not giving out any of those Reese's.
I know.
They all stay in house.
You get the variety pack and you take those out and put those in the closet.
Of course you do.
Put them in the fridge. Go, it's a cold one. Awesome. So,
See, sometimes the kids, you ever get this one on Halloween, Dean? You go to hand out a candy, and the kid goes, "Oh, I don't want that."
Exactly. So sorry.
Exactly. Kids.
So Ryan, so somebody wants to get more information, a practice interested in doing a demo, getting more details. What's the best way for them to do so?
Yeah, you can go right to our site, which is www.gaidge.com. Gaidge is spelled GAIDGE.com. And right there, you'll be able to navigate the site, click and set up your own demo, schedule it when it's available. We have the calendar right there, and our sales team will take care of you and walk you through it and see if it's a fit for your practice.
Good. From just a personal perspective, again, being a new user, I am so impressed and so surprised at how valuable the information is, and it's really laid out for even a mathematical moron like myself to understand. But it's really been I regret not having it sooner. So I'm really pleased with it so far, and you look forward to learning more about it. But it's really for those that don't think they need it. You really do.
Got to know your numbers. As I say in Shark Tank, you got to know your numbers.
Got to know your numbers, exactly.
Know your numbers. If you don't, you're gone. So, Ryan, thanks so much, man. Appreciate you're educating us. There's some great information here, guys. Data is so important. We can't stress it enough. And no matter what you do, it comes down to data. The world is broken down into numbers. Everything is a database, plain and simple. So you have to know what to do with the numbers. And if you have the ability to let a platform like Gaidge decipher that for you and walk you through it, it's a home run. So try it out, guys. It's give it the thumbs up here. So again, Ryan, thanks so much. Barry, thanks so much for all the insight there, and everybody out in podcast land. Be safe, be happy, and happy smiles, and go trick or treating. Don't take a bite of any apples.
and hoard those Reese's.
Exactly.
There you go. Hoard the Reese's. There you go.
Right.
Thank you guys for having me. I really appreciate it.
Got it. Thanks, everybody. Be well. Bye-bye.